T-Rex protects human camp from Velociraptors. The aftermath is incredible. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The jungle stretched endlessly, thick with towering trees and dense undergrowth. The air was humid, heavy with the scent of damp earth and vegetation. Birds cawed from the treetops, and in the distance, the faint sound of rushing water hinted at a nearby river. Dr. Alex Carter adjusted the strap of his backpack, his nerves on edge. The expedition had been running smoothly until now. Their camp was set up in the clearing just ahead, a cluster of canvas tents and supply crates, but something felt off. The usual chirps of insects and distant animal cries had gone eerily silent. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Beside him, Emma Reynolds, the team's paleontologist, paused mid-step. "Do you hear that?" Alex nodded slowly. "Or rather, what I don't hear." The jungle had gone completely still. Then a rustling, not the casual movement of wind through leaves. Something deliberate, fast, stalking. A shiver ran down Alex's spine. He turned toward Jake, their guide, who had suddenly gone rigid. The older man's face paled, his hand drifting toward his machete. "Back to camp," Jake whispered. Emma's brow furrowed. "What? Why?" Now, Jake hissed. Before anyone could react, the jungle exploded. Out of the foliage, 3 velociraptors burst forward, teeth bared, eyes locked onto them. Everything happened in a blur. Jake shoved Emma back. "Run!" The group scattered, tearing through the jungle toward the safety of camp. Alex's pulse thundered in his ears as he sprinted, the snapping of branches and guttural snarls too close behind him. They weren't going to make it. The camp was only a few yards away, but so were the raptors. The lead one, a massive beast with dark mottled scales, lunged. Then the ground trembled. A deep, rumbling roar split the air. The velociraptors skidded to a halt. Their predatory focus shifted. From the jungle's edge, a shadow loomed. Then, with earth-shaking footsteps, the massive form of a Tyrannosaurus Rex emerged into the clearing. Emma gasped. "Oh my God!" The T-Rex's golden eyes locked onto the raptors. Then it charged. The ground shook violently as the T-Rex charged forward, its massive frame tearing through the jungle like a living force of nature. Trees bent under its sheer weight, and the air rippled with its deafening roar. The velociraptors, so confident moments ago, now reeled back in terror. Their predatory instincts screamed at them. This was no longer a hunt. This was survival. The lead raptor, the largest of the pack, let out a sharp screech, signaling its companions to scatter. But it was too late. The T-Rex was already upon them. With a single, devastating swipe of its powerful tail, the T-Rex sent one of the smaller raptors flying through the air. The creature let out a piercing shriek before colliding with a tree, its body crumpling upon impact. Alex and the rest of the team stood frozen, watching in sheer disbelief. Jake exhaled in awe. "I can't believe this." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. It's protecting us." The remaining 2 raptors darted in opposite directions. The leader snarled, unwilling to abandon its dominance so easily. It crouched low, eyes darting for an opening, hoping to outmaneuver the towering beast. The T-Rex snorted, nostrils flaring, turned its head slightly, watching, waiting. The raptor made its move. With lightning-fast reflexes, it lunged for the T-Rex's throat. Fatal mistake. The T-Rex twisted at the last second, its massive jaws snapping forward. Crunch. The entire jungle seemed to go silent. The raptor let out a strangled screech before the T-Rex shook its head violently, snapping the creature's spine. Its lifeless body dropped to the ground like a broken doll. The last surviving raptor let out a frantic screech before turning tail and disappearing into the jungle, its cowardice overriding its loyalty to the pack. And then silence. The only sound left was the T-Rex's slow, heaving breaths. Alex realized he had been holding his own breath and finally exhaled. The entire team stood in stunned disbelief. Jake was the first to speak. "We should be dead." Emma took a step forward, her gaze locked onto the towering predator before them. The T-Rex, having neutralized the threat, turned its massive head toward them. For a split second, no one moved. Then, in a shocking display of control, the T-Rex simply snorted, then took a step back. It wasn't attacking. It had saved them. Emily's voice trembled. It knew. Alex's hands shook. It protected us. The T-Rex let out a deep huff, then, without another glance, turned and disappeared back into the jungle. The moment it was gone, the team collapsed to the ground in exhaustion, their minds racing with the impossible truth. They had just witnessed something that defied everything they knew about nature. And this was just the beginning. The jungle was still trembling from the encounter, but the silence that followed felt even more unnerving. The team remained on the ground, struggling to catch their breath, their minds racing with the impossible reality of what had just happened. A T-Rex had defended them. It had made a conscious decision to fight the raptors, not for food, not for territory, but to protect them. Alex wiped sweat from his forehead, his heart still hammering. He turned to Emma, whose wide eyes remained locked on the spot where the massive predator had disappeared. Did we all just see that? His voice came out hoarse. Jake, still gripping his machete, let out a shaky breath. We saw it. We sure as hell saw it. Emma finally moved, shaking her head as if to clear it. That doesn't make sense. Tyrannosaurs were apex predators, but this isn't normal. This is... She struggled to find the right words. Intentional, Alex finished for her. That thing saved our lives. The reality of the moment settled in. They had set out on this expedition to confirm traces of prehistoric creatures in this isolated region. But nothing had prepared them for this. Seeing dinosaurs was one thing. Encountering one that seemed to understand them, to protect them, was something else entirely. We need to get back to camp, Jake said firmly. Regroup, check our supplies, and figure out what the hell we're dealing with. No one argued. Slowly, they picked themselves up and made their way toward their base, stepping carefully over the raptor carcasses. The smell of blood and crushed vegetation was thick in the air. The jungle, once again, was silent, as if even the natural world was trying to make sense of what had just transpired. When they reached camp, everything was still intact, but it no longer felt secure. The flimsy tents, the scattered equipment. None of it was enough to keep them safe in a world where creatures from another era roamed freely. Alex grabbed his radio, trying to reach the main research station miles away. Base, this is Carter. Do you read me? Static. He tried again. Base, come in. Still nothing. Emma checked the signal booster. Something's interfering. It was fine earlier, but now, she trailed off. Jake threw down his pack. Of course, just when we need it most. They weren't entirely cut off. They still had maps, supplies, and their survival instincts. But there was something deeply unsettling about not being able to communicate with the outside world after what they had just witnessed. We need to document everything, Emma said, pulling out her field journal. Every detail, every movement, every reaction. Alex ran a hand over his face. And what do we even say? That a T-Rex played the role of our bodyguard. Emma shot him a look. If we don't document it, no one will ever believe us. She wasn't wrong. As they gathered around the central table, they took turns recalling every moment of the attack. The sounds, the movement, the way the T-Rex had reacted. Every detail was crucial. Then, a sound in the distance. A deep, distant bellow. They froze. Jake reached for his rifle. It's still out there. Alex exchanged a glance with Emma. And I think it knows we're here. The reality of their situation settled over them like a heavy weight. This wasn't over. Not even close. Night was approaching, and with it came the unknown. They had entered a world where prehistoric giants still ruled, and now they had the attention of the most powerful predator to ever walk the earth. The question was, what happened next? Nightfall descended over the jungle, wrapping the camp in an eerie, suffocating silence. The usual hum of insects and distant animal calls seemed to vanish, replaced by an unsettling stillness that set everyone on edge. The presence of the T-Rex lingered like an unspoken threat, or perhaps a warning. Emma sat by the flickering lantern, flipping through her field journal with shaking hands. Every note she had scribbled down in the past few hours felt more like the ramblings of a delusional mind than actual scientific observations. A T-Rex had protected them. That fact alone shattered everything she thought she knew about prehistoric behavior. Alex paced nearby, gripping his radio tightly, still hoping for a signal. "Base, this is Carter. If you can hear me, respond." Nothing but static. Jake sat on an overturned crate, sharpening his machete with slow, deliberate strokes. His face was grim, his usual cocky attitude long gone. He had been on hundreds of expeditions, seen things that defied logic, but nothing like this. "We should leave at first light," he muttered. "Whatever's happening here, it ain't natural." Emma looked up from her journal. "And go where? Back into the jungle where velociraptors could be waiting? You saw what happened today. We're safer staying put." Jake scoffed. "Safer? You call being babysat by a T-Rex safe?" Alex finally stopped pacing. "We don't have enough information. The T-Rex saved us, but we don't know why. Was it territorial? Protective? Or did we just happen to be in the right place at the right time?" Emma rubbed her temples. "There has to be an explanation. Maybe its instincts aren't purely predatory. Maybe it recognizes us as something other than prey." Jake snorted. "Or maybe it's just keeping us alive until it decides it's hungry." Before anyone could argue, Duke, their tracking dog, let out a low growl. His ears flattened against his skull, eyes locked onto the tree line. Everyone froze. Then the ground trembled. It was faint at first, a subtle vibration through the soil. Then another, a slow, steady rhythm. Alex's heart slammed against his ribs. He didn't need to see it to know. The T-Rex was coming. Emma scrambled to her feet. "Everyone, stay still." The tremors grew stronger. Leaves quivered. Tent poles rattled. Then, from the shadows of the jungle, it emerged. The massive form of the T-Rex loomed just beyond the tree line, its golden eyes reflecting the flickering light of their camp. Its nostrils flared, scenting the air, its muscular frame shifting with each slow, calculated step. Duke let out a soft whimper but didn't move. No one dared breathe. The T-Rex took another step forward, then another until it stood at the very edge of their camp. Alex's mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. Then, something unexpected happened. The T-Rex lowered its massive head, sniffing the ground near their supply crates. It let out a deep, rumbling huff, almost as if inspecting them. Emma whispered, "It's not attacking." Jake still had his machete gripped tightly. Yet, the T-Rex let out another slow breath before shifting its gaze toward them. For a moment, Alex swore he saw something in its eyes. Not hunger, not aggression, but something else. Recognition, curiosity. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the T-Rex lifted its head and turned away. Its heavy footsteps shook the ground as it retreated back into the jungle, disappearing into the darkness. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex exhaled, his entire body trembling. "Tell me someone else saw that." Emma clutched her journal to her chest. "It was watching us." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "No, it was checking on us." The realization sent a chill down Alex's spine. Whatever was happening here, they were no longer just observers in this prehistoric world. They were part of it now. And the T-Rex? It wasn't just a predator. It was guarding them. The night stretched on, thick with tension and an unshakable sense of unease. No one spoke for a long time after the T-Rex disappeared into the jungle. The only sound was the distant rustling of leaves, the occasional chirp of an insect, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of Duke, still crouched low, ears flicking toward every subtle noise. Alex finally sat down on an overturned supply crate, running his hands over his face. His thoughts were spinning. Nothing about this made sense. A T-Rex wasn't supposed to act this way, wasn't supposed to exhibit protective behaviors toward humans. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Emma was still scribbling notes furiously in her field journal, pausing every few seconds to glance toward the darkened jungle, as if expecting the creature to return. Jake, on the other hand, was pacing. His grip on his machete was so tight that his knuckles had turned white. "This is insane," he muttered under his breath. "This whole thing is insane." Emma finally looked up. "What part, exactly? The fact that we're sharing territory with an apex predator? Or the fact that it's acting like it's looking out for us?" Jake shot her a glare. "Both," Alex exhaled, his mind still trying to process everything. "It could be territorial behavior," he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe the raptors were too close to its hunting ground, and we just happened to be in the crossfire." Emma shook her head. "No, could have ignored us. Or worse, it could have taken us out first. But it didn't. It deliberately intervened, fought off the raptors, and now it's watching us. That's not normal predatory behavior." Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "So what? You think it sees us as what? Part of its pack?" No one had an answer. A gust of wind rattled the edges of the tents, making the shadows stretch unnaturally across the ground. Duke let out a soft growl but didn't move. He was sensing something. Emma closed her journal, setting it aside. "We need to figure out what this means. If the T-Rex is truly acting outside of its natural instincts, that means something is influencing its behavior." Alex frowned. "Like what?" She hesitated before answering. "We don't know enough about how these creatures interact in the wild. We assumed they operated on pure survival instinct. But what if there's something deeper? What if it recognizes us as something different?" Jake scoffed. "Different how?" Emma glanced toward the jungle. "Not a threat. Not prey." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Alex leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "So let's assume you're right. That means we're dealing with a level of intelligence we didn't expect. What do we do now?" Emma met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "We test it." Jake laughed dryly. "Yeah? And how exactly do you test a 15,000-pound killing machine?" Emma took a deep breath. "We observe. We see if it comes back. We see how it reacts to us. If it wanted us dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now." Alex exchanged a glance with Jake, then sighed. "As insane as this sounds, it's the best plan we have. If this T-Rex truly sees us as something other than prey, we need to understand why." Jake muttered something under his breath but didn't argue further. Silence settled over the camp again, each of them lost in their thoughts. Then, just as the tension started to ease, Duke's ears snapped up. A low, distant rumble vibrated through the ground. Everyone froze. Emma whispered, "Is that?" Another tremor, then another. Alex's stomach clenched. "It's coming back." They turned toward the tree line, where the jungle loomed, dark and uninviting. The faintest glow of moonlight reflected off shifting leaves, revealing a massive shape moving toward them. The T-Rex had returned, and this time it wasn't alone. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as the ground trembled beneath their feet. The rhythmic thuds of approaching footsteps were unmistakable. The T-Rex was coming back. But this time, something was different. Duke let out a low growl, his body tensed, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the tree line. The rest of the team remained frozen, barely daring to breathe as the enormous shape emerged once again from the dense foliage. The moonlight illuminated the massive predator, its golden eyes glowing in the dim light. But it wasn't alone. Trailing behind the T-Rex, two smaller creatures moved cautiously through the undergrowth. Their long, slender bodies were unmistakable juvenile tyrannosaurs. Alex's heart nearly stopped. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "It has offspring." Jake stiffened, gripping his machete instinctively. "You've got to be kidding me." The juveniles were significantly smaller than the adult, still massive compared to a human, but lacking the sheer bulk of their parent. Their movements were hesitant, unsure, as if they weren't quite used to venturing this close to something unfamiliar. The adult T-Rex took another step forward, lowering its head slightly. It wasn't displaying aggression. If anything, its posture was almost calculated. Emma's mind raced. "It's showing them something," she murmured. "It brought them here, to us." Alex swallowed hard. "Why?" The T-Rex let out a low, guttural huff, its breath misting in the cool night air. The juveniles, encouraged by their parents' stillness, took hesitant steps closer. One of them let out a small, almost questioning chirp. Duke let out another low growl, shifting slightly in front of the group as if unsure whether to defend or retreat. Jake shook his head. No way. This isn't happening. What the hell is going on? Emma's voice was full of awe. It's introducing them to us. The statement sent chills down Alex's spine. Dinosaurs weren't supposed to behave like this. T-Rexes were supposed to be ruthless hunters, apex predators, not caretakers showing their offspring a group of humans like some kind of lesson. Yet here they were. The larger juvenile took a few more steps forward, its amber eyes flicking between the humans and Duke. Its nostrils flared as it scented the air, trying to make sense of these strange creatures that didn't run, didn't fight. Then, slowly, it lowered its head toward the ground. The movement was so gentle, so cautious, that it sent a wave of disbelief through the group. Emma dared to take a step forward, her breath hitching. It's not afraid. Alex grabbed her arm. Are you crazy? She didn't take her eyes off the juvenile. If it wanted to attack, it would have done it already. The young T-Rex let out another soft chirp before nudging at the ground with its snout. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't hunting. It was curious. Emma felt her heart hammering in her chest. Slowly, carefully, she crouched down, picking up a small, smooth rock from the ground. Then, in the softest motion possible, she rolled it across the dirt toward the young T-Rex. Everyone held their breath. The juvenile jerked back slightly, startled by the tiny movement. But then, after a moment of hesitation, it took a cautious step forward and nosed the rock. Emma exhaled shakily. Oh my God! The adult T-Rex let out a deep, rumbling huff, watching the interaction closely. But it didn't intervene. The other juvenile took an uncertain step closer, tilting its head at the sight of the small object being nudged across the dirt. Seemed to be watching, observing, learning. Jake rubbed a hand down his face, his voice filled with disbelief. Are we playing fetch with a dinosaur? Alex was still too stunned to respond. Emma, however, was grinning despite the sheer terror still coiling inside her. I think we just passed some kind of test. The reality of it all sank in. This wasn't just a random encounter. The T-Rex had brought its young to them, not as prey, not as a warning, as an introduction. And that realization changed everything. The jungle remained unervingly quiet as the two juvenile T-Rexes continued to investigate their strange new surroundings. The adult T-Rex stood motionless, its massive frame towering over the camp, watching, waiting. Its deep, steady breaths were the only sound breaking the silence. Emma barely dared to move. The younger of the two juveniles, emboldened by the gentle interaction with the rock, took another step closer, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Its golden eyes flicked between the humans and Duke, its head tilting slightly as if trying to make sense of what it was seeing. Alex felt his pulse pounding in his throat. I still don't get it, he whispered. Why would it bring them here? What is it trying to show them? Emma's voice was hushed, careful. Maybe it wants them to learn something. Jake let out a quiet scoff. Learn what? How to track their next meal. Emma shook her head. No, I think it's teaching them that we're not prey. The idea was impossible, yet everything they were seeing pointed to the same conclusion. The T-Rex wasn't just tolerating them, it was guiding its young through an interaction with humans in a way that suggested understanding. Duke let out a low huff, his stance shifting as the larger juvenile took another cautious step forward. The creature's movements were slow, deliberate. Then, without warning, it extended its snout slightly, sniffing the air just inches from Duke's face. For a second, no one breathed. Duke didn't move. He stood his ground, his ears flicking, his body tense but not aggressive. The juvenile hesitated. Then, in the smallest, most unexpected gesture imaginable, it let out a soft, almost questioning chirp. Emma's eyes widened. It's communicating. Alex could hardly believe what he was seeing. Then something even more surreal happened. Duke, as if sensing some unspoken message, let out a soft, slow whine. The young T-Rex shifted, its head tilting at the sound. The chirp it gave in response was higher-pitched this time, more inquisitive. It took another step forward, almost as if it expected Duke to do the same. Jake whispered, "Tell me we are not witnessing a dog making friends with a dinosaur." Emma barely registered his words. Her hands trembled slightly as she scribbled notes in her field journal, documenting every detail, every subtle movement. This wasn't a simple case of animals crossing paths. This was an interaction. The adult T-Rex let out a low, rumbling exhale, shifting its weight slightly. It had been completely still until now, simply observing. But the sound it made next was different. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a warning. It was almost approving. Emma's breath hitched. "It's allowing this." Alex shook his head, still struggling to comprehend what was happening. "We have to be careful. Just because it's not attacking doesn't mean we're safe." But deep down, he knew something had changed. The young T-Rexes weren't attacking. They weren't even acting on predatory instincts. They were watching, learning. The adult had brought them here intentionally. Something about this group of humans had convinced the most fearsome predator in history that they weren't a threat. Duke let out another quiet whine, his tail giving the smallest wag. The larger juvenile let out a soft huff, then took a slow, deliberate step back toward its parent. The smaller one followed, casting one last glance toward Duke before retreating. The adult T-Rex turned, giving the team one last lingering look, then rumbled low in its throat, a deep, resonant sound that felt like a farewell. And just like that, the massive creatures disappeared into the jungle once more. The silence they left behind felt unbearably loud. No one spoke. No one moved. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Jake let out a long, shaky breath. "I don't know what just happened," he muttered, "but if I wake up tomorrow and find them curled up by the fire like house pets, I'm quitting this expedition." Emma let out a breathless laugh, though there was still an unmistakable awe in her voice. "We just witnessed history." Alex ran a hand down his face, his body still buzzing with adrenaline. "I don't know what this means yet, but we need to figure it out, because whatever had just happened between them and the T-Rexes, it wasn't over. It was only the beginning." The jungle remained still long after the T-Rex and its young disappeared into the dense foliage. The weight of the encounter lingered in the air, pressing down on the team like a silent force, one that none of them could fully comprehend. Emma sat cross-legged on the ground, her journal open in her lap, but she hadn't written anything in the last few minutes. Her fingers hovered over the page, the pen motionless as she replayed everything that had just happened. Alex sat nearby, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the last spot where the massive predator had stood. "I still don't know what to make of this," he muttered. Jake let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah? Try explaining it to someone back home." "Oh hey, guess what? A T-Rex came by, brought its kids, and let us hang out with them like we're some kind of nature documentary crew." He scoffed. "They'll lock us up for even saying it out loud." Emma finally snapped out of her daze, tapping her pen against the page. "We don't have to explain it. We just have to document it." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And what? Write a best-selling book called How to Befriend a Dinosaur?" Emma ignored him, turning to Alex instead. "You saw what happened. It wasn't just random. The adult was leading them here on purpose. That's teaching behavior. It's..." She shook her head in disbelief. "It's completely unprecedented." Alex exhaled. "And that's what scares me. If they're capable of learning, of recognizing us as something other than prey, then that means we're dealing with a level of intelligence we never accounted for." Jake frowned. "You're saying they're smarter than we thought?" Emma nodded. "Smarter in a way we don't understand yet." Duke let out a soft whine, breaking the moment of heavy silence. His ears perked up as he lifted his head toward the jungle, nostrils flaring. Alex stiffened. "He hears something." Jake instinctively reached for his machete. "Oh great, more visitors." Emma stood, eyes narrowing toward the tree line. "No, it's different." Then they heard it, a distant, muffled rumbling. Not the heavy footfalls of a T-Rex, but something lower, more mechanical. Emma's stomach dropped. "That's not an animal." Alex jumped to his feet. That's an engine. A moment later, the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air sent a fresh wave of alarm through the group. Jake cursed under his breath. Tell me that's our people. But as the bright floodlights from the incoming helicopter swept over the treetops, illuminating the clearing like a beacon, Alex's gut twisted. This wasn't a rescue. This was something else. The helicopter circled overhead before slowly descending toward a small open patch near the camp. The downdraft from the blades kicked up dirt and loose foliage, forcing the team to shield their faces as the aircraft settled. Duke growled low, his stance shifting protectively in front of the group. The moment the doors swung open, armed men poured out, dressed in tactical gear, rifles strapped across their chests. Jake took a step back. Yeah, this is bad. One of the men, clearly in charge, strode toward them with measured authority. His expression was unreadable behind the visor of his helmet. Alex forced himself to stand his ground. Who the hell are you? The man didn't answer right away. He simply studied them, his gaze flicking toward the jungle, as if assessing whether the creatures they had encountered were still close by. Then, finally, he spoke. You need to come with us. Emma's jaw tightened. Like hell we do. The man's expression remained neutral. That wasn't a request. Jake glanced at Alex, muttering under his breath. Told you this was too good to be true. Alex's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they know? And more importantly, what did they want with them? Because something told him that whatever was happening, it had just become a whole lot bigger than a simple expedition. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The armed men moved with military precision, their rifles held at the ready, their expressions unreadable behind their dark visors. The steady whump-whump of the helicopter's blades still echoed through the night, sending a rhythmic pulse through the ground beneath their feet. Duke stood in front of the group, his body rigid, muscles tensed like a coiled spring. His low, guttural growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a primal warning that none of them needed translation to understand. The man in charge didn't even flinch. He simply turned his head slightly, nodding toward one of his men. The soldier nearest to Duke took a step forward, his rifle still slung across his chest. Control your dog, the soldier said in a clipped tone. Alex's jaw tightened. Stand down, Duke. Duke let out another warning growl but didn't move from his defensive stance. The leader of the armed men took another step forward, removing his helmet. Underneath, his face was weathered, lined with experience, his sharp blue eyes scanning them with cold calculation. My name is Colonel Briggs, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. You need to come with us. Now. Emma crossed her arms. And why exactly should we do that? Briggs tilted his head slightly, as if weighing how much to reveal. Because you've seen something you shouldn't have. And that makes you valuable. Jake let out a scoff. You mean expendable? Briggs didn't deny it. Alex's pulse pounded. He had no doubt that whoever these men were, they weren't here to help. Their arrival was too well-timed, too deliberate. They knew something, and that meant one thing: they had been watching. Emma's eyes narrowed. You knew about the dinosaurs. Briggs didn't even blink. You ask a lot of questions for someone who isn't in control of this situation. Jake smirked. And you give a lot of vague answers for someone trying to get us to comply. Briggs sighed as if they were wasting his time. He turned to Alex, eyes narrowing. You don't have much of a choice here. Either you come willingly, or we make you. Duke growled louder, stepping protectively in front of Alex. Briggs exhaled through his nose, clearly growing impatient. Fine. Do it the hard way. With a single gesture, the soldiers raised their rifles. Everything happened at once. Duke lunged. Jake dove for cover. Emma let out a sharp curse as the first shot fired. Alex felt his body move on instinct, reaching for Duke as chaos erupted around them. Soldiers shouted, some backing up in alarm as the massive dog barreled toward them, teeth bared. Then another tremor. Only this time it wasn't the helicopter. It was something far bigger. The jungle shook violently, trees swaying as deep, thunderous footsteps closed in. The soldiers hesitated, some breaking formation as they instinctively turned toward the source of the sound. Briggs's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time, his mask of control slipped. No, he muttered. The T-Rex had returned, and it was not happy. The massive predator burst through the tree-line, letting out a deafening roar that shook the very air. The soldiers immediately turned their weapons, but it was already too late. The T-Rex charged. Jake scrambled back, pulling Emma with him. "We need to move now," Briggs shouted orders, but the moment his men opened fire, it was over. The bullets barely phased the beast as it slammed into their formation, sending bodies flying like ragdolls. Alex didn't waste another second. "Run!" Duke barked once, already moving as the team sprinted toward the opposite side of the camp, ducking between tents and supply crates as chaos unfolded behind them. Briggs's men were scattered, panicked. They had come in prepared for a controlled situation, not a full-blown battle with the king of dinosaurs. Alex didn't look back. His only focus was getting out alive. The last thing he heard before disappearing into the jungle was the piercing screams of the soldiers and the victorious roar of the T-Rex. The jungle was alive with chaos. Gunfire cracked through the night, mingling with the thunderous roars of the T-Rex. The soldiers' shouts turned to screams as the massive predator tore through their ranks like they were nothing more than insects in its path. The once intimidating tactical unit was now in full retreat, scrambling to escape the very creature they had likely been monitoring from afar. Alex didn't dare look back. He could hear everything: the crashing of trees, the guttural snarls, the unmistakable crunch of bodies being crushed under unimaginable force. His only focus was getting as far away from the camp as possible. Duke ran beside him, his body low to the ground, ears pinned back, sensing the urgency of the moment. Behind them, Emma and Jake sprinted through the underbrush, dodging fallen branches and tree roots as they tried to keep up. "We need to get to higher ground," Alex shouted, barely able to hear his own voice over the madness behind them. Emma gasped between breaths. "The ridge, we passed it earlier. If we can climb up, we'll have a better vantage point." Jake gritted his teeth. "If we don't get eaten first." A deafening boom echoed through the trees. A second helicopter, circling overhead. The floodlights swept across the jungle, casting eerie, elongated shadows that stretched and flickered with every movement. More soldiers, more trouble. Alex cursed. Who were these people? What did they know? But there was no time for questions. The jungle erupted as another massive form crashed through the foliage. A second T-Rex, slightly smaller than the first but no less terrifying. It stormed through the wreckage of the camp, its head snapping toward the fleeing soldiers. "Oh, come on!" Jake yelled. "There's two of them?" The original T-Rex let out another earth-shaking roar, but this time, its attention wasn't on the soldiers. It was on the new arrival. Emma's breath hitched. "They're challenging each other." The smaller T-Rex responded with its own deep, rumbling snarl. The two prehistoric titans locked eyes, circling, muscles coiled, tails lashing behind them. Jake yanked on Alex's sleeve. "We do not want to be here when this goes down." Alex didn't need to be told twice. "Go! Now!" They ran. The thick jungle gave way to uneven terrain, the incline of the ridge just ahead. Emma pushed forward, digging her boots into the loose dirt, clawing her way up the rock face. Alex and Jake followed, Duke bounding up effortlessly beside them. As they reached the top, Alex risked one last glance behind them. The two T-Rexes were in full battle mode. The smaller one lunged first, jaws snapping just inches from the larger predator's throat. But the original T-Rex sidestepped with shocking speed, slamming its body into its opponent, sending the smaller one stumbling backward. The ground quaked from the sheer force of their movements. Soldiers scattered like ants, some still firing useless rounds at the beasts, others desperately trying to reach the second helicopter as it hovered above. Then something changed. The larger T-Rex suddenly pivoted, locking eyes on the escaping aircraft. For a brief moment, everything slowed. Then, with a power that defied reason, the massive dinosaur charged. It launched itself forward, jaws snapping at the tail end of the helicopter. The pilot must have panicked. The aircraft lurched, swaying violently as the beast's teeth grazed metal. Emma's eyes widened in horror. Oh no! The helicopter spun out of control. The massive machine tilted sideways, its rotors clipping the top of a nearby tree before the entire aircraft plummeted downward. The explosion that followed lit up the entire jungle. Flames erupted into the night, smoke billowing upward, the shockwave knocking the smaller T-Rex onto its side. The soldiers who hadn't been crushed or eaten were now running for their lives. The original T-Rex lifted its head, letting out a victorious roar. The team stood on the ridge, watching in stunned silence as the world burned beneath them. Jake let out a shaky breath. Well, guess they don't need us to fight their battles. Emma whispered, we shouldn't be here. Alex knew she was right. They had just witnessed the impossible, and somehow they were still alive. But how much longer could they survive in a world where humans weren't at the top of the food chain anymore? And worse, what if they weren't the only ones watching? The night sky glowed an eerie orange from the burning wreckage below. Smoke twisted upward, blotting out the stars. The jungle was alive with chaos, the victorious T-Rex letting out one final, earth-shaking roar, the surviving soldiers scattering in every direction, and the wounded, smaller T-Rex slowly struggling back to its feet. From their vantage point on the ridge, Alex, Emma, and Jake watched in stunned silence. No one spoke. No one could. Duke let out a soft whimper, sensing the tension in the air. His body was still low to the ground, ears twitching at every sound. Emma finally exhaled. We need to leave. Now! Alex tore his eyes away from the carnage below, forcing his brain to work again. They couldn't stay here. Whatever had just happened, whatever power struggle had unfolded between these prehistoric giants, they were caught in the middle of something much bigger. Yeah, he muttered. Let's go. They turned, slipping into the dense foliage beyond the ridge, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. The jungle swallowed them whole, branches and vines closing in around them like nature itself was warning them to stay hidden. They walked for nearly an hour before Jake finally spoke. So what now? We're lost in the middle of a dinosaur-infested jungle, and we just pissed off a bunch of guys with guns. Emma didn't slow down. We find higher ground. We figure out a way to get a signal out. Jake scoffed. And what? Tell the world what we saw. That dinosaurs are alive and apparently smarter than we thought. Emma shot him a glare. That T-Rex brought its young to us, protected us, and now it just took out an entire armed unit. This isn't just about survival. We're sitting on something bigger than any of us realize. Alex kept his gaze forward. She's right. Jake sighed. Yeah, I get it. But let's just focus on not dying first. They trudged forward, exhaustion pressing down on them. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. But they couldn't stop. Not yet. The jungle was quieter now. No more gunfire, no more roaring. Just the distant crackling of fire and the occasional rustling in the trees. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by soldiers. Not by another T-Rex. By something else. Duke stopped abruptly. The team froze. A branch snapped somewhere to their right. Alex's pulse skyrocketed. He turned slowly, scanning the darkness. The jungle was dense, suffocating. Then a shadow moved. Emma inhaled sharply. Did you see that? Jake whispered. Tell me that was the wind. Alex didn't answer. His fingers tightened around his belt knife. Then, from the darkness came a sound. Not the guttural snarl of a predator. Not the distant cry of a bird. A click. Then another. And another. It was slow, rhythmic, deliberate. And then Alex knew. His blood ran cold. Velociraptors. Jake whispered. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Alex didn't move. No sudden movements. The clicking grew louder, closer. Multiple sources. Surrounding them, Duke let out a low growl. The fur along his spine bristled. Then, from the shadows, the first raptor stepped forward. Sleek, deadly intelligent. Its narrow eyes locked onto them with unsettling focus. Its body coiled and ready. Another emerged from the opposite side. Then another. Emma whispered, There's 3 of them. Jake let out a humorless laugh. Great. That's how many killed those guys at the camp. We are so screwed. Alex's mind raced. Fighting was suicide. Running was suicide, which left them one option. Thinking fast, he slowly reached into his pack. The raptors tensed, their heads tilting. Watching, he pulled out one of the leftover supply rations, dried meat. Emma's eyes widened in realization. Are you seriously? Shut up, Alex hissed. He tossed the meat into the darkness. The first raptor whipped its head toward the sound, nostrils flaring. A tense second passed. Then it moved. The others hesitated, watching, calculating. The leader clicked its teeth, but after a moment, it followed. Alex didn't breathe until the jungle swallowed them whole. The moment they were gone, Emma let out a shaky breath. Okay, Jake whispered. I am officially done with this jungle. Alex exhaled, adrenaline still buzzing through his veins. Keep moving. We're not out of this yet. They pressed on, deeper into the jungle, their survival hanging by a thread. Because now, they weren't just dealing with T-Rexes and soldiers. The raptors had caught their scent. And next time, they wouldn't be distracted so easily.